Your rights are my responsibility. A man has to decide that he's going to do something. And I'm not listening to your stupid classes.
Hello, my name is Bill Roach, and this is another episode of Timeless Dialogues. And today we're going to deal with the issue that you have been seduced by a whole host of university professors, philosophy professors, publishing houses, conferences, and more into what I deem as anti-philosophy. Namely, what's going on is you have a whole host of people out there who are telling you that they're doing philosophy, but insofar as you follow their method, you are not going to arrive at the end goal of philosophy, which is the love of wisdom and living the good life. And in order to deal with this today, what I want to do is I want to, in many respects, teach you how to study the history of philosophy by providing you some of my favorite Peter Kreeft books, because what I think they're going to do is give you a good introduction to what is philosophy, what is this love of wisdom, what is the good life that everybody talks about, and why you should continue down that good life for the totality of what you're trying to do, whether you're a businessman, whether you're a banker, whether you're a professional philosopher, and so much more. However, before we do that, what I want to do is I want us to see that there's a fundamental issue that we have to understand. Let's just say each of us are going to go out sailing, and we want to take our ship from one direction across the sea into another direction. We recognize that in the very beginning, what's fundamental to our entire enterprise is how we point and direct the ship, because we recognize that a small deviation at the beginning can be a very large deviation in the end. So if you're trying to set sail from one destination, and let's just say the wind was pulling you just a little bit to the right, you may end up hundreds, if not thousands of miles away from your end destination. And what I wanted you to see is that so much of this can occur in a similar fashion as it comes to this issue of philosophy. There are so many people whom I have found as a PhD in philosophy and professor of philosophy who hate philosophy because they had a misstep in the very beginning, and where the course took them in the very end was so much further away than what the heart and soul of philosophy was set out to be. So what I want to do is I want to provide you with the top 5 books that I think are going to correct this. In other words, I want to set you in the right direction philosophically, so you end up in the proper destination, lest you end up in the drudge of nihilism or analytic philosophy or Marxism or other isms and schisms that are going to keep you away from this goal. So what I want you to see is this, is first and foremost, we're going to get quickly into these books, is that one has to recognize that there are just different approaches to philosophy. As I say, you have the historical approach and basically everything else. And what the historical approach tries to do is it tries to take the history of philosophy as its starting point. So you start in the very beginning and you see how philosophy starts to evolve, and you see the conversations that take place. Now, another way of understanding this is that one person has stated that philosophy is nothing more than a series of footnotes on Plato. Are you agreeing with him? Are you disagreeing with him? Are you adding to him, subtracting from him, and so much more? And when you think about it, that is exactly how it all tends to operate. All of the key questions and all of the key issues are found in the earliest philosophers. And now we're just merely dealing with a whole myriad of footnotes that are trying to interact with them. And what I want you to see is the historical approach puts things in their right order. You understand the flow of ideas, and you understand the issues surrounding those ideas, and you understand the wars that are surrounding the ideas, or maybe the wars that came for particular ideas, and how they arrive at various conclusions. In many ways, what you have to see is that there's a flow to the history of ideas. And if we just pull an idea out of the river and study it as an idea, there's a place for that. But if we yank it completely out of its context, we divorce it from its true humanity and its true realistic aspect of it, one thing that you're going to find is that that's like the ship. You're going to end in a destination where philosophy is nothing more than just a vain academic exercise. It does nothing more to make you live the good life. It helps you none. It benefits you none. And it ends up becoming useless. In addition to this, I want you to see that the historical approach does not separate ideas from life, or philosophy from living, or reality from real people. And what's interesting is that in my experience, so many people who study philosophy see these individuals as people that are at some, random university studying random topics that have no assortment of purpose to our daily lives. And the most argumentative people tend to fall into that discipline, of which nobody likes them and nobody wants to be around them because, frankly, they're jerks. And what I want you to see is that is actually antithetical to the vision of philosophy that was laid out by its greatest framers and founders, namely Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. What people are finding in those instances are sort of analytic approaches, or topical approaches usually, of which the whole point is to tick off as many people in the class and pit them against one another with the end goal of having, quote, good conversations. It means nothing to their life. It separates the real ideas from their life, philosophy from living, and reality from real people. When the truth of the matter is that we're called to be a group of people who love wisdom. We're to love the true, the good, and the beautiful. We're to have knowledge of those things which are true. We are supposed to live the good, virtuous life. And we are to adore those things which are beautiful, the transcendentals. If this appeals to you, I want you to realize this is a whole other approach to philosophy. Now, what I also want you to see is that many of the other approaches, I claim they're actually doing anti-philosophy. Almost like when you read the text of scripture, you have Christ and Antichrist. In so many respects, you have philosophy, which is the love of wisdom, and anti-philosophy, which is anti the love of wisdom, and usually they're just given to endless speculative debates. So, namely, if philosophy is the love of wisdom, many approaches undermine this because they simply provide no love for wisdom, but an endless and vain search for debates upon debates upon debates. And what I want you to see is that this idea of the love of wisdom, knowing how to do the right thing in the right way, at the right time, with the right good, according to the right amount of knowledge, in order to live the good life, is exactly what so many people are longing for today. And to realize that when you give up on that, you've really bought into another philosophy. You're ironically another footnote on this great history of philosophy. Namely, you're a great detraction thesis on the history of philosophy. And what I want you to see is that many approaches to philosophy never want to help you live and learn the good life, or even ask the right questions of whether or not there is a good life. Both of these and these entire sort of systems are anti-philosophy because they are opposed to the notion of the love of wisdom and a life that matches the love of wisdom. So with that said, I want to direct you to Peter Kreeft's top 5 books that have helped me in this regard. And one thing that I want you to know is that I always say that Peter Kreeft is my favorite living philosopher. And the reason is that I think Peter Kreeft gets it in this regard. His books are not simplistic, but yet they get straight to the point. He takes complex ideas and reduces them to their kernel and to their core so that you can understand them. So if this is a book or this is an approach that would appeal to you, I would highly recommend Peter Kreeft's book. So with no further ado, I want to start out with the first book that I required. In fact, it's the book that I use for all of my introduction to philosophy books. And here's what it is. It's titled Philosophy 101 by Socrates. Now, what this book tries to do is it gives you an introduction to philosophy via Plato's Apology. And what it tries to do is get you into the original literature. It tries to build these original ideas, and you're going to start and you're going to understand exactly what philosophy is and what philosophy is not. So one of the things that I want you to realize is that the Apology of Socrates gives us 40 different things about what philosophy is. And let me read a few of them. It says this: philosophy is ignorant, it's selfish, ironic, plain, misunderstood, a failure, poor, unscientific, unteachable, foolish, abnormal, divine trickery, egalitarian, a divine calling, laborious, countercultural, uncomfortable, virtuous, dangerous, simplistic, polemical, therapeutic, conformist, embarrassing, invulnerable, annoying, pneumatic, apolitical, docile, which is teachable, messianic, pious, impractical, happy, necessary, death-defying, fallible, immortal, confident, painful, and agnostic. That's all 40 of them right there. Now, let me tell you this first portion here so that you can understand exactly what he's trying to get at. So you can just get a hint and a flavor of what this book is. So philosophy is ignorant, but I thought you just told me, Bill, that philosophy is the love of wisdom. Well, let's just listen to this. He says this: philosophy is ignorant. The first words of the first sentence in Greek are, I do not know. This is the hidden key to the central meaning of the dialogue. Plato usually gives the reader such a clue to help him and hides it to test him. For example, the first words of the Republic, as I went down to Piraeus, signals Plato's descent into the cave of politics. The first words of the Minos, can you tell me, Socrates, signals the point of the dialogue as the Socratic method of teaching, by questioning, not by telling. The first words of the Phaedo, quote, were you there with Socrates? Ask the reader to identify with Socrates' life and death, somewhat as a Christian does with Christ. Were you there when they crucified my Lord? Were you there? The first words of the Euthyphro, this Socrates is something new, question, signals the fact that Socrates represents a fundamentally new kind of religion and piety that the old one, represented by the Euthyphro, cannot understand. So notice what he's doing here before we get into this. He's starting to say this whole issue is that when you read Plato, which is really a whole diatribe on Socrates, you understand how the whole argument's going to be laid out, usually in the first line itself. Now, why is that important? The reason that that's important is because you would probably miss that if you were just going through reading these books for the very first time. And what Kreeft is going to do is he's going to give you these insights into these various books so that you have a deeper understanding, or really a realistic understanding. It's not some Gnostic hidden understanding. It's been there the whole time. You just kind of never saw it. And what he's going to do is he's going to do exactly what every good teacher does. He's going to pull this out. So now let's look at this. He goes on to say this: the most unforgettable section of the whole apology for nearly all readers and for all the subsequent history of philosophy is the account of the Delphic oracle's pronouncement, relayed by Socrates' friend Chaperon, that no one in the world was wiser than Socrates, and Socrates' response, devoting his life to the unraveling this riddle by trying to find someone wiser than himself, developing the Socratic method of cross-examination in order to do this, and concluding now at his life's end that he has solved the oracle's riddle. Note this, here's the solution. Though he has no wisdom at all, only God has wisdom, he says man pursues it. This is wisdom, to know that he does not know, and that the world must learn it if it wants to be wise. This is lesson 1. The first and most indispensable lesson. If we forget it, all subsequent lessons are only apparently learned. Think about this. So the true philosopher, the true person who is seeking for the love of wisdom, must first know that he does not know, or as it says in the very beginning here, I do not know. The end goal is to realize there is God, who is the embodiment of wisdom, who is wisdom magnified. And as a Christian, it's revealed in Jesus Christ, who is wisdom made flesh. And notice this. Notice what he's exactly saying here. The solution. If you get nothing else out of this video, I want you to realize this. Though he has no wisdom at all, this is wisdom, to know that he does not know, and the world must learn it if it wants to be wise. There are so many people out there in philosophy who think that they have all the answers to all the questions on all the issues, and the first philosopher and the greatest philosopher, namely Socrates, took the exact opposite approach. He says, no, the truly wise person recognizes the limits of his knowledge. He recognizes the fact that he does not know. And what this does is it immediately humbles you, puts you in your place, and realizes that your goal is to submit to the wisdom that has been given to you, to submit to the knowledge that's been given to you. This is lesson 1. And if we forget it, we're not going to learn any of the other lessons. Why? Because you're frankly going to be too arrogant and too prideful to try to figure it out. Now, to our second book by Peter Kreeft, titled A Socratic Introduction to Plato's Republic. Now, this book speaks directly, as it states here. It is trying to go through Plato's Republic, and what it's trying to do is it's trying to offer the main points of the book, and it's going to look at the parallel between the soul and the state. And a lot of people think that this book is really just a long diatribe, the Republic, just a long diatribe on education and politics and how you should form a society and so much more, when the real point of the book, the main point of the book, the main point of the Republic is that you as an individual parallel the Republic, that you as the individual are not just trying to allow the philosopher king to rule society. Rather, you're trying to allow wisdom to rule you in your passions that are drawing you astray. And the reason that that's such a big issue is that so many people today try to think that the Republic and philosophy is all about just vain, useless, unnecessary things of life. And one of the things that the Republic tries to do is it tries to bring us to this point where we realize that the whole point of life is to live the good life. It's to allow wisdom to dictate the good life. And that's precisely what philosophy seeks to do. And the Republic is going to do that for you. Now, I don't want to just stop there. I want to provide you with one other little key thing that this book does, and it's in the very end. Namely, it's in the whole issue of what can almost be like the final appendix, where he goes through and he says, if it is true that that the history of philosophy is nothing more than a series of footnotes on Plato, usually Plato's Republic in this regard, and a lot of the things in the other dialogues of Plato, well, he shows you that. And he talks about how Aristotle is a footnote, and how Epicurus and Pyrrho and Stoicism and Augustine and Plotinus and Aquinas and Bacon and Machiavelli and Spinoza, Hobbes, and all the rest. And he tells you specifically how they end up being anti-philosophies in this regard. So let's just look at one that has just dominates so many. Marxism. How's Marxism in this sense different? It says this: Marxism or communism is called dialectical materialism because it accepts Hegel's claim that everything evolves through history, a historical relativism, through a dialectical process, as Hegel said, of a conflict between two forces, the thesis and the antithesis, which are reconciled into a higher synthesis. But the content of this historical process for Marx is material, not spiritual, as it was for Hegel. It is not an evolution of God. Marx is an atheist, but of matter. He is a materialist. Politically, Marx taught the communal collective ownership of all the means of production, wealth for everyone. Thus, there is to be no private property nor even private families. Plato restricted this to the small class of the guardians or philosopher kings, like Catholic monks. Marxism abolishes classes and substitutes absolute equality, a classless society. Marx also bought into this utopian classless society could come about not through rational persuasion, which was Plato's method, but only by violent revolution. You see the point of this? You see the differences here? Plato said you could have this society by reason and rational persuasion, and Marx says you can only have it through violent revolution. That's probably one of the key contrasts between what you see in contemporary philosophy and what's taught here. So again, Introduction to Plato's Republic, one of the best you are ever going to find. Now, my third and probably one of my favorite books is titled The Platonic Tradition. And this book is really a history of philosophy. It's a series of 8 lectures that looks at what is the essence of this Platonic realistic tradition. And it lays out what that tradition is, and it looks at how the role of Socrates within that tradition, and then it applies it. And what I want you to see is this, is that it gives us this idea that it's talking about real realism. You have real forms, a real reality that's external to you, not dependent upon you, that's the locus and place and content of knowledge. You can have real knowledge about real reality, and you can apply it to living the good life. Now, he makes this key distinction where he talks about 3 additions to Plato. And one thing that I want you to see from this is that in this particular book, he talks about with Plato, and you have the forms that are sort of external. They are, in many respects, not in the things themselves, which is a whole issue that you'll look at as you read the books. But what he says is that all of these different sort of realistic Platonistic concepts believe in the forms. They just give them a different postal address. So Plato put them in some kind of nebulous outside world. Aristotle put them in the things themselves, and Christians put them in the mind of God as divine ideas. And you're going to see in this book the relationship between rationalism and empiricism, and also the great work that Christian philosophers brought into this whole conversation. And there he's going to talk about Christian Platonism, which is this idea of Christians who believe in realism. And then it's going to show you ways that people deviate from this, namely nominalism, which denies there are any forms, and positivism, which says all we have here is just the physical empirical world, and all kinds of statements that we can make about them are just physical empirical positivistic statements about that world. And then in addition, he's going to get to nihilism, which is the moral, practical, and ethical effects of there's nothing above you, there is no good life, there is no true good or beautiful. Rather, you are left to the demise of yourself alone, and right makes, or basically might makes right. And then he's going to kind of finish with the signals of what this whole Platonic tradition can give us in today's world. So again, these three books right here are historical foundational books. They're going to lay out exactly what is the essence of philosophy, a lot better than some of the books that you're going to read in many other arenas of life. Now, the next one that I want you to look at here, back to virtue. So one of the things that he's going to look at here is that so many people today realize that we are not a virtuous people. We're sort of missing something. There are aspects of our lives that should be there and yet are not. So Kreeft wrote this book titled Back to Virtue. And what he looks at is this idea of a civilization at risk. Whatever happened to this idea of virtue, and how Western culture is on sort of the couch of its absolute demise and falling apart. And he gives you the history of how we got there. Now, I don't want to dive into that too much because the other books are going to do it, but I want you to also get it. The point is that we are not a virtuous people. We're an anti-virtue people. We are people who are totally given over to postmodernism and nihilism and a life of drudgery. And what Kreeft does here is he starts to look at the key personal virtues that a person should have, the classic virtues, like the four cardinal ones, justice, wisdom, courage, and moderation, or the three theological ones, faith, hope, and love. And he's also going to look at the Beatitudes that confront the 7 deadly sins. So poor in spirit versus proud in heart, giving mercy versus getting things, blessed mourning versus mourning at others' blessedness, namely envy. That sucker got it. The meek and the peacemaker versus the anger driven, the hungering for righteousness versus the satisfied with sloth, namely you're lazy spiritually, practically, and in reality, the pure of heart versus the lustful of heart, courage under persecution versus self-indulgence, namely gluttony, and in conclusion, the winsomeness of virtue. So if you're looking for somebody who wants to embrace the virtuous life, namely you want to be a person who follows justice, wisdom, courage, and moderation, faith, hope, and love. You want to be a person that follows the theological virtues of Jesus Christ that's found on the Sermon on the Mount versus, as he would talk about here, the 7 deadly sins, which are axiomatic and practically given to every era of life because they're foundational to humanity. I would recommend this book. This book lit a flame in me, probably more than any other philosophical book that I have ever read, to want to be a virtuous person, namely to do the right thing in the right way, at the right time, according to the right measure, for the right ends. If that's appealing to you, I would recommend reading this book. Now, the final book, titled The Best Things in Life, a contemporary Socrates looks at power, pleasure, truth, and the good life. And what this book is this is really a good little book that's going to understand the idea of education and why you should actually study philosophy. And he's going to look at a whole host of objections that people give for why you shouldn't study philosophy and why philosophy is useless. Here's the book, by the way, The Best Things in Life, Peter Kreeft. All of these can be purchased on Amazon.com, by the way. And one of the things that he's going to look at is that, philosophy may not actually make bread for you. Like there's a running joke that what's the difference between a philosopher and a pizza? Well, at least a pizza can feed a family of 4. And we can laugh at that. And yes, you can make a living studying philosophy and get into business and all the rest. But what this book is going to do is it's going to give you the reason for why you should actually make bread in the first place. It's going to give you reasons for why wisdom is something that should be pursued. It's going to really, more than any other book, say, what's the purpose of education? Why do we make love? What is love? What is the good of money? And what is good money versus bad money? And can computers think like us? And is there a difference between capitalism and communism? And what is the greatest good? And is belief in God just like belief in Santa Claus? And he does this in a way through what's known as a Socratic dialogue, which you're going to get in the other ones, but this is a modern Socratic dialogue. This is going to be a Socratic dialogue where the person representing of Socrates drops down into our era and into our age in order for you to see exactly why we live in probably the most broken, backwoods, twisted, malignant, backwoods, I've said that already, understanding of life. And he's going to provide a corrective. He's going to show you exactly what the good life is, why you should live the good life, and why philosophy is beneficial to you. So again, the whole point of this, if you made it to the end here, is that, as I said, most universities, professors, and books claim the name of philosophy, when in fact they are really teaching you anti-philosophy. They are raising themselves up against the notion of philosophy as the love of true wisdom. And what I hope these books do is give you a historical approach that's in a tangible format that's going to help you to understand exactly what we're trying to get at when we say you need to live the good life, what is the good life, and this concept of the love of wisdom. So again, thank you. I appreciate it. And I hope you go and buy all of these books by Peter Kreeft.